Hi guys, it is me, Jacqueline. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. For today's video, I'm going to be doing my June, May, and April wrap-up. I know I really do suck, but it's just because I had spring semester with school and then I went immediately into summer session, and I really appreciate you guys for understanding. This is actually my last week of my undergrad, which is insane to say. I'm really not trying to get choked up, but I've really worked hard these past 4 years. I've even put kind of my education and my mental health over this channel for a while, and it's kind of full circle the fact that I'll finally be done it. I'll be graduated and I can really just put my love and energy into reading and this channel, which I cannot wait to start making more and more content. I swear the next wrap up, which will be July, it will be its own sort of thing. So let's start ranking the books I read, because honestly these past few months I've read some of my favorites of the year and some of my least favorite of this year. So I think when I did my January, February, and March wrap up and ranking, I started with the favorites first and then my least favorite. I think I'm actually going to do the opposite. We're going to start with my least favorite books first and then go on to my favorite books that I've read. So the first book I have is my least favorite book I've read all of this year. And I really don't want to hate on this book, but this was not good. It is The Mermaid, The Witch, and the Sea. This is from Maggie Tuka Hall, and this was just so disappointing. This was definitely one of my most disappointing reads this year. I already talked about that in my mid-year freak out book tag, and if you haven't checked that out, we'll leave that up in the cards. I just was super disappointed with this book. It had so many concepts that I was excited for. It says, the blurb, a desperate orphan turned pirate and a rebellious imperial daughter find a connection on the high sea in a world divided by colonialism and threaded with magic. So there were so many things that ticked it for me. You guys know I love my pirates. There's also this whole magic element involved, and it was actually supposed to be a female to female relationship. I felt that while this had so much potential with it, it really did fall flat. A lot of the development I felt we needed more of, specifically when it came to their relationship and the individual characters. I felt like the one character we got to kind of understand more, but the other kind of love interest, she almost felt very flat to me in a way. I thought certain plot devices and, you know, the magical element, the colonialism, the world building itself really was not structured enough that it actually flew well off the page. I felt that it was really choppy, and there was a lot of times that I was debating on DNFing it, but I was like, you know what, I just need to push it through. Maybe I'll like it. I believe, yeah, this is a standalone, it says. So I'm not interested in if it does become a series or anything like that. I was just really disappointed with it, and there is nothing I could really say that's really good about this book. I gave it a 1 out of 5 star, which not is a rarity for me, but it takes a lot for me to really be disappointed by a book, and this is definitely that book that really badly disappointed me. Next, I have Wrong Bed, Right Brother, and this is from Rebecca Brooks. This is the 4th book, part of a companion series, but this is a standalone. I saw this at NetGalley, and this was kind of during my reading slump because it was after I finished Crescent City, or House of Blood and Earth, but then directly right after I finished From Blood and Ashes, and I reread it, and I felt like I didn't really want to touch another book. So for me, when I have these slumps, a really great way for me to get out of them are contemporaries, just because they're really easy for me to kind of blank out a lot of the world and stuff like that. So I picked this up with the idea that it would kind of help me pull me out of my slump, and while it was easy to read, I read this in a matter of hours. I think I actually like stayed up pretty late to finish it because I just wanted to see what was going to happen. It wasn't anything unique to me. It's not something that I definitely wouldn't recommend, but I'm not highly recommending it because I don't really think it stands out to a lot of the other contemporaries or new adult contemporaries that I have been reading recently. So this was one that was okay and definitely flew for me. It has that kind of hate to love romance. It's interesting. Our main character is in love with our love interest brother, and she by accident goes into his bed instead of the brother's bed, and it's a whole thing, but I just felt like it escalated really quickly. I felt like their relationship and the dynamic itself just kind of switched too much for me, especially for a hate to love. This was kind of like hate for a second, and then it turned to friends, and then it turned to lovers. Like, it just escalated really too quick for me to really actually enjoy it. Next we have the Chrysalids, which is from John Wyndham. This is a science fiction dystopian. I believe this was published in like the 1970s. Now, I had to read this for a class. I feel like this is one of those stories that if I didn't actually have to read it for the class, I don't think I ever would eventually have picked this up. But also because of my class, and specifically the professor I had, because I absolutely loved her, I actually enjoyed this story more from that, and I got more from the discussions that she held. So this was an interesting book. Our world is kind of surrounded by this idea of genetic mutation. Our main character lives in a society where genetic mutation is something they look out for and they try to get rid of. He eventually figures out that him and a lot of his friends actually have these genetic mutations, so they leave and they eventually find another civilization. So it's kind of the idea of different societies and their way of dealing with these genetic mutations. It's a lot of religious overtone as well, and a lot of past versus present. This was written during the 70s, so it was kind of supposed to be parallel to things like the nuclear war and such. So it was interesting. I just didn't love it, and I think if this is something that you've been interested in reading, definitely check it out, because there were some parts that actually were not fascinating to talk about, but kind of, like I said, parallels to historical context and relevance to that were definitely there. And I don't know, that class was really interesting because we got to really read a lot of different science fiction and dystopian novels, which I always enjoyed, and it was just a different experience than I feel like I would have had if I just read it by myself. So I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars, I believe, and it's okay. Yet again, not one that I would highly recommend. Next book we have is The Album, and this is the first book of part of the Cruise Control series, which, funny enough, the author was actually super kind, and I think once I posted my Goodreads thing and it kind of refreshed on Twitter, she reached out to me through email, and I just saw it recently and asked if I wanted to read the second book. So I haven't responded to her, and I don't think I would potentially want to read the second book just because I didn't really love this first one. So I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. I would probably give it like a 2.25 out of 5. I really wish Goodreads had that like 0.5, 0.25 rating. It was interesting. So we follow our main character as she's actually in the present at her ex-boyfriend's concert. I'm not going to say how she gets there, but she is actually watching her ex-boyfriend and his band members perform. And when she's doing that, she's reminded of her past with him. So we go back and forth between the present and the past. And we kind of figure out how she got here and how their relationship started, how it progressed, and how it ended. And I liked it. I felt we got to know our character, but not really know her enough to feel for her. And I found that a lot of these characters were shells instead of really well-rounded and developed. And I was really looking forward to it because I thought this idea was nice. So I just thought it kind of fell a little bit too flat for me. So this is one that, yet again, I was reading during a time where I was trying to get out of a slump, and I really appreciate it for that, but it wasn't my favorite book that I've read. Okay, so my cat is snoring, and I'm not going to wake her up because, oh, okay, she's just too precious, so I'm not gonna wake her up. The next book I have is The Trouble with Hating You, and this one I also got approved through NetGalley. I was really looking forward to this one, and I flew through this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. We follow a Indian romance. Our main character is one that is very accomplished. She's worked very hard for her success, and she kind of gets thrusted in a way to this idea of an arranged marriage from her family, and she's very much against it. We see a kind of banter dynamic between our main character and the love interest, and I really enjoyed kind of their overall development. They were just really cute moments and just moments that had me crying throughout this book. It's hard because there were some factors that really held me back on giving it a 3.5 or a 4 to 5 stars, so I found the beginning was a little bit harder for me to get into the story initially, and I also found that while our characters were actually rounded, I found certain elements weren't developed too much when it came to that. There were some issues that went on with our main character, and I wanted a little bit more when it came to those factors. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are also, I just wanted to kind of warn you guys, if you do want to pick this up, there is sexual assault that is discussed and featured, and there's also kind of emotional and physical abuse along with that, and there is a death that is in this story. So Just a warning in advance if you do decide to pick it up. There were either some parts when it came to their family dynamics, which you guys know I love all sorts of different relationships, and I feel like family relationships and siblings and parents and stuff like that are kind of overlooked or overshadowed when it comes to certain stories, and I really loved that whole approach. There were some things, yet again, I really enjoyed, but the ones and the cons I had overshadowed it to not make it a 4 or anything more on the rating scale. So I just wish for a little bit more dynamic. I also found that the ending wasn't really what I was expecting. Like, I thought the progression towards the ending and the build towards the ending could have been more developed, but of course I am definitely looking forward to seeing more from this author. And yeah, I think if you are interested in a Indian representation when it comes to a new adult contemporary romance, this is definitely one for you. Next book I have is Crave from Tracy Wolff. This is a YA paranormal romance, and this is the first book part of a series. The second book is coming out later this year, and I'm actually really excited for it because this is a good starting book, but I have a feeling I'm even going to love the series as a whole more. So for example, the sequel, just because the beginning kind of is almost like every typical YA story, or almost feels like that in a way. There were some parts in the beginning still that I really enjoyed and liked when it came to our own individual main character and the characterizations and the relationships that were built. There were even some parts that had me laughing out loud. This was one of those books that I actually did kind of highlight certain parts that really stood out to me, which I definitely want to continue doing when it comes to my arcs, because who cares. But there was a part with her anxiety that I really related to and such. It was enjoyable, to say the least, and I actually found yet again that the ending and what kind of happens that makes it unique will leave me really excited for the sequel. So in this book, we follow our main character as she is going to Alaska after her parents die, and she's living with her uncle and her cousin. Her uncle runs a academy of sorts, and she realizes pretty quickly this academy is very weird, and she kind of gets thrusted into a paranormal world. So we do follow the idea of vampires, but also other paranormal creatures as well, which I always enjoy. And I just really also want more when it comes to this setting. I think it being taken place in Alaska is really unique, so why not dive more into that? But in general, it was just a really nice kind of opener. Yet again, not the perfect book or one that I love, just because there were some parts that I was like, okay, this is a little cheesy or a little predictable, but the ending really took me by surprise and has me super excited for the sequel. So this is one that I cannot wait to see what else happens in this series, and I think it's been blurbed as this generation's Twilight. I can see that, and I talked about that in my mid-year freak out book tag. I understand where they're coming with that, but I think this is very different still. And what was kind of surprising was kind of what happens at the ending, and I even was reading yet again, or rereading the beginning, like this whole thing. I literally wrote banter, which you guys know I love, so it was just fun. Like, I just felt like this was a book that I really was just reading super fast. I flew through, and I was just not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. Next we have White Fragility, and this was one that I not really struggled on how to give a rating to, but it is a nonfiction. It does and is one of those books that I think, especially my white viewers watching, is one that I would highly recommend to pick it up. This is one that is directed towards us, and I think specifically this is a book that features a lot of topics that Black people have been talking about for years and years and years. Good and bad binary, we have coded language in here, and we also have white solidarity as well. Those are just some of the elements that are in this book, but I think this is one that is very important. I think education is key when it comes to what has been going on, and I think so many people are not educated enough, and like I said, this has been going on for years and years and years. So I think it is so important to actually pick up a book and really start to learn what has been going on. I also read White Rage, which I gave a higher rating to. That one really took me by surprise personally. That one almost read more of like a history book in a way for me. There were just so much that kind of was discussed in that book that I've also reread it too. These are books that I don't feel like it is a one and done read. I think these are books that you can actually go back to and pick up for relevance, especially White Rage specifically. That was one that really took me by edge, and I have reread certain parts multiple times because it's not just enough to read it once. These are two books that I would definitely recommend when it comes to this topic. These are great introductions. This is not just the end all be all as well. There are so many other books on these conversational tones that have been happening and are really relevant in today's time and will stay relevant until they are fixed or actually acknowledged. The next book I have is Cinderella is Dead. This is one yet again I got through NetGalley, and I really enjoyed this one. I flew through this story. This was the first book I read for the Queer Blackathon. I'm going to leave all the lovely ladies that were a part of the Queer Blackathon and their channels down below as well. Please check them out. I was debating on if I wanted to do vlogs for it, but this was actually when I had work, so it was more like me just reading on spot and on edge, so it wasn't really the smartest idea for me to vlog about it. But this is one of those books that I think I'm actually going to reread because I want to do a whole retelling recommendation video, and this is a Cinderella retelling. It is a queer Cinderella retelling. We follow our main character is in love with her best friend, and she gets invited to the ball because everyone that is a female in the kingdom has to go to this ball, and she ends up finding a direct descendant of Cinderella, and it kind of pursues from there because what is perceived as being reality in this kingdom is not actually reality. And what I really enjoyed was this author kind of hinted at certain elements that are really relevant in today's culture, and I found that she did that extremely well. I believe this actually is the author's debut novel, and I think she just did a really good job. This was one that I was, not that I didn't expect to love it, but I just really was enjoying myself reading this story. My cons really for this book are pretty redundant. I feel like I always say this, but I really just wanted more development, especially when it came to the romance, but I also wanted more development when it came to certain plot elements, and I found specifically the ending to not be the best for me. I just found the ending wasn't what I was not expecting but hoping for, so I was not disappointed because I still really like this book. I would definitely recommend it. Like I said, if you're looking for a retelling, especially a Cinderella one, this is one that I feel like I've read a couple other Cinderella retellings, and this one definitely stands out compared to those. It was just so unique to me, and I just really liked it a lot. Next we have Oryx and Creeks, and this was actually the third time I read this book. All three times I read this book for classes, and actually this was the second time I read this book with the same professor. So it was a different course subject, so we looked at it a little differently, but each time I read this experience, I just really appreciate Margaret Atwood's development and her research when it came to actually building the concept of this dystopian and science fiction. You can really tell that she not only researched things, you know, science-wise, but also environmentally wise and psychologically. I just think this is a really different dystopian and science fiction, and I know it's a part of a series. I've heard iffy things on it. I don't really feel a need to continue on with this series. Third time reading, I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. The next book I have is one of my favorite books I have read so far this year. If you have not checked it out, please add this onto your TBR. It doesn't come out until September, but it is so good. It is Legendborn, and this is from Tracy Deonn, and this is actually her debut novel, and let me tell you, this is one of the most impressive debut novels I have ever read in such a long time. Like, still even me just about to talk about this book, I'm getting so excited because I loved this story so much. This was the second book I read during the Queer Blackathon. It was a bigger book. It's like 500 or so pages, and yet again I was working and kind of a little bit busy during the Queer Blackathon, so it was any time I could possibly read it, I was, and I fell in love with this story. There's so much to it. We have a black main character who is so amazing. She is so fierce. We also have a love triangle, but that didn't even piss me off. It just like developed right, and we have our queer characters with their magic abilities, we have the King Arthur retelling vibe. There's just so much going on, and I cannot wait for the second book. I don't even know when it's going to be published, but the fact that I've already read this and now I'm like, where the hell is the second book? Like, what the heck? Also, the political dynamic, there's like a secret sort of society in there. There is just so much to this story, and that's why I think I am so impressed by this author. This is her debut novel, and as I've been saying for a lot of the books that I gave sort of poor ratings to, I kept saying I want development, I want development, and she does that. She has well-rounded characters with intricate relationships, and she really delved into this magic system, and I just I can't stop raving about this enough. I really want more people to put this on their TBRs because this is one of the best books I have read so far this year. Yet again, I really want to do an individual book review, but I feel like it's too early for me to do one now. Maybe I'll do a spoiler-free one now, and I'll do like a book discussion closer to the release. But let me know what you guys would like to see when it comes to that. But seriously, highly, highly, highly recommend this one. Please put it on your TBR. It's amazing. And if you're watching this, Tracy, so impressed by you. I cannot wait to see more of your books, whatever you come out with, specifically this series, but just anything. Your writing ability, it speaks volumes when it comes to this book. Like, she is unreal. Next, we have an Ember in the Ashes from Sabata here. This was a reread for me. 5 out of 5 stars first time, 5 out of 5 stars second time. This will always be one of my favorite books, I feel like, and I've heard this series just gets better and better with every single book. I started this book during my finals week in the spring, so that's why I didn't really go on to the second and third book, but I definitely actually want to reread this one a third time and get on to the second and third, and I really do actually want to vlog it and do individual book reviews because the fourth book, a part of this series, is coming out in the fall, and Sabah just does such a beautiful job, not only with just building the world and really getting you to visualize what exactly she is trying to get across, but her characters and even her villains, like, she just does such a well job, especially with this first book. Like knowing the fact this series just gets better and better with each book has me so excited to see where exactly we do go with these characters. So I'm definitely looking forward to continuing on with the series, and if you haven't checked this book out, I would highly, highly recommend it. The final book I have to talk about is another one of my favorite books I read this year, and one that I was like so surprised by how much I enjoyed this book, but that is From Blood and Ash from Jennifer L. Armentrout. I have already read this book twice. I'm really debating on reading it a third time. We finally got the release of the second book, which was going to be this fall, and I cannot wait. I need it in my life. This first book blew me away. I just loved our characters, I loved the romance, but I also loved the different elements and twists and turns. This was just one of those stories that, yet again, you know, it did cause me to go into a reading slump, but it also helped me with my House of Blood and Earth reading slump. So it was just one of those experiences that I cannot say enough good things about when it comes to the story. Our love interest, chef's kiss. Seriously, like, I can't say good enough things. Yet again, I do want to do a book review or a video review, sorry, for this book. So I think I'm going to do one closer to the release of the second book. So then once the second book comes out and I read it, I can just have that as well. So let me know if you guys would like to see any video reviews when it comes to these books that I talk about. I feel like I can go on tangent when it comes to any, whether it be good or bad. Just so many of the books that I've read over these past few months, I either really love, kind of like, or the one I hated. So it was just really nice to be able to read some of my favorites these past few months, aka Legendborn, From Blood and Ashes, and Ember in the Ashes. I really love these three books so incredibly much, and they're definitely my favorites of this year. I mean, I have so many more to read that I want to read, but I'm looking forward to it. So Pumpkin woke up and wanted my love, but that was my June, May, and April wrap up. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know yet again if you want to see any video reviews. I love doing them and discussions, so I already kind of have a few in mind that I want to do, but I want to hear what you guys would like to see. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!